Thank you, RC, for those remarks. May I commend both the RC and the previous panel because they already started us going on the subject of resource mobilization. The session is on resource mobilization for South-South and triangular cooperation. Before getting into the discussion, please allow me to express the UN Office for South-South Cooperation's thanks to the PPD Chair, PPD Secretariat, and UNFPA for including us in this discussion. And may I also start by observing the presence of the Minister and Chair of PPD. Our ties with PPD are based on the principles of South-South and triangular cooperation, rather of South-South cooperation, because triangular cooperation does not have its own principles. Returning to the discussion now, I think it was the Minister who said yesterday, if it is not paid for, it ain't happening. So that's the crux of our discussion today. The purpose of this panel is to look at what we mean by resources, because sometimes it's not clear. We have to look at the opportunities to access resources, the constraints to access resources, and the roles of the various stakeholders and partners in all this. Most importantly, in this panel, we're going to learn from the experiences of colleagues in the panel who are from various walks of life at the national level, at the institutional level, and how they've dealt with these issues almost as case studies. Let me tell you who is on the panel right now. First, we're going to have Dr. Leticia Adelaide Appiah, Executive Director of the National Population Council of Ghana. In the program, it says we have the Ambassador Rui Pereira. We will have the UNFPA representative in Brazil, Ms. Flopela Fernandez. And then our third panelist will be Mrs. Pesta Siraha, Country Director, Population Services Zimbabwe, and Chairperson of Civil Society Organizations in Zimbabwe. The fourth panelist will be Professor Dr. Mohamed Rizal Matua Damanik, who is Deputy for Training, Research and Development, National Population and Family Planning, Government of Indonesia. And last but not least will be Dr. Alan T. Napi, who is founder and CEO of Harvest Today. Before I hand over the floor to the respective speakers, I was actually asked to present an overview on this subject. So can you please put on the, if I could see it over there, I don't see it over there, that would be easier. Is it possible? If it's not, then I will just have to turn around and look at my slides. So can we go on to the next slide, please? So what we're trying to do here is to look at funding and in-kind exchanges, capacity building, appropriate technologies. For those who were in the previous section, you did see that a lot of people did go over this. So the way I'm trying to look at it is that resources, for most people, when you talk about resources, people tend to think we're talking money only. But in the context of South-South and triangular cooperation, we are talking about all those four boxes. And funding can be in the form of grants from other partners. We know how, as the Global South, some countries have grown and have the means. They're actually providing grants financing. You can have concessional loans from the international financial systems or some of the development banks. And somebody yesterday mentioned the issues of exchanging goods and services. trade and investment certainly are important. Investment from south to south has grown in the recent years. And then if we go to the in-kind exchanges, human resources, I think we're talking about people being seconded from one government, from one institution, to go to another institution to provide some advice, some advisory services or training. We're talking about human resources. If you don't have these human resources, it's not possible to do South-South cooperation. So you should have people who are well-equipped in terms of what is South-South and triangular cooperation. You can have people-to-people exchanges. One quick example I always give is Barefoot College trained some women in India to help private sector countries capture their data. And the resident representative of UNDP in Bhutan talked to India, and they sent in a bus about 13 women, and they went there for a few days and taught the women in Bhutan to be able to do the same job. And these women were now making a living out of capturing the data for companies. That's the kind of people-to-people exchanges. We also have volunteers under South-South cooperation spearheaded by the UNV program. Knowledge exchanges are very important. We have talked about various platforms, but knowledge has always been at the center of South-South cooperation. From the time we talked about TCDC to South-South cooperation. And the idea of knowledge is that you're not going to reinvent the wheel. You're going to learn from what has been done, and in so doing, you can leapfrog and go to the next stage of development. Capacity building, we can't do South-South cooperation without capacity building. And in capacity building, we need the tools and manuals. There are countries and some institutions who have spent quite a bit of time and resources on developing these tools and manuals. We have training and visits, hosting people that are coming from other countries. That does cost some money, some resources, and if people are moved from their jobs, there's also opportunity cost for what they are doing. And then peer reviews, particularly in the voluntary national reviews, that's a very important way of also sharing South-South and triangular cooperation. Last but not least, when we have had South-South and triangular cooperation, we have always talked about the issue of appropriate technology. The RC just spoke about digitalization and its importance today. That's one of the issues that is going to be critical for South-South cooperation, because everything is changing with digitalization. And if South-South cooperation cannot change in the same way, we'll be left behind again. Next, please. And then the next part, I wanted to just demystify something that most people usually confront me with when I'm talking. They'll say, but where are the resources for South-South cooperation? And my answer is, they are everywhere. Because there is no such thing as resources of South-South cooperation from the outset. But they become resources for South-South cooperation by design, by a decision at policy level or at some institutional level. And therefore, the same constraints that we have for mobilizing the resources in general are the same constraints that you have for mobilizing resources for South-South cooperation. So that's critical, because even up to now, there are people who expect a pot of resources with a label, South-South cooperation, to come. That doesn't happen. A decision has to be made. And therefore, if we look at the difference, after saying that, you ask the question, what is the difference then? The difference is that with South-South cooperation resources, we are sharing. That's why I always say the principles are important, because you take out the principles, you are into commercial, you are into anything else other than South-South cooperation. But you share, and as a country, you may expect to get some return from it, but at the same time, you know that you are definitely helping another country. So the solidarity, the mutual gains is central to sharing resources on South-South cooperation. Next, please. I need to move faster. Then let's look at some of the tools. And one of the most important underrated sources of funding South-South cooperation are, of course, national funds. And there is a spurt of national South-South funds that are created by some countries, particularly in Latin America. And that is to finance both local South-South cooperation as well as outgoing South-South cooperation. We have to look at some of the issues that prevent the countries from having healthy fiscus to be able to put resources into South-South cooperation, including tax evasion by companies that operate in the developing South. We need to tap onto the diaspora funds, and there are a couple of countries, notably Ethiopia, the Philippines, who are getting resources, and some of these can be channeled to South-South. I'm not saying they channel them to South-South cooperation. I'm looking at the sources of funding. Controlling illicit outflow of funds is also very important. Partnering with the private sector. I think, again, there was a mention that we move from funding to financing. And when you are partnering with the private sector and other institutions, foundations, you are moving into that sector of innovative financing. I put triangular cooperation over there, which can be a bit controversial for some people, but I did tell you that triangular cooperation doesn't have its own principles. So you get resources under triangular cooperation to support what is essentially South-South cooperation. And so that's why I looked at it as a resource. But on the right-hand side, in able to be able to do that, the South-South cooperation institutions have to have a proper legal standing. The other day we were mentioning that PPD can sometimes have obstacles to raising resources. And it's the same thing with my organization, by the way. The measurement of results was also mentioned. We are moving to a time where people want to say, you are putting resources for South-South cooperation, what do you gain from them? And I'm glad to say that UNCTAD is working with a group of pilot countries to come up with this measurement framework on South-South cooperation. And when I was a regional coordinator in Bangkok, I worked with the UNFPA office, and they worked on the social rate of investment. They were going to use this on South-South cooperation as well. So all these are means to answer the question, what are we achieving, really? Next, please. The UN system now, I have to be quicker. We need to we can mobilize resources to support member states in which we work in, and there are instances of that. We can support in preparing bankable projects and ideas for getting resources, advising governments in terms of how you can access resources, and strengthening the partnerships between South-South triangular cooperation. Certainly the UN system can be involved in that. And we're also involved in developing tools. For example, the UN Office for South Cooperation has a system-wide strategy, and we have prepared the South-South guidelines, which, if I had time, I would really have loved to tell you about, because they do have sections on resource mobilization. Next, please. Next, please. Okay, now going to some examples, and here you will see that they are linked. So if you click on any of those, you will be able to actually see these funds. I will not describe what they do because you can access them. Under the UN South-South Trust Fund, we have the India, Brazil, and South Africa Facility for Hunger and Poverty Alleviation. We have also the Perez Guerrero Trust Fund for South-South Cooperation, which is a G77 fund. And it's used for catalytic things, like you can have a small meeting, you can have a study to help you maybe develop a broader concept of South-South cooperation. We have the United Nations Fund for South-South Cooperation, which is dominantly China, but also the Republic of Korea, as well as voluntary contributions by the member states into the fund. These are also available. And we also have India on its own. It has the India UN Development Partnership Fund. Please click on them and you can read on them quickly. Next slide, please. We have resources managed by member states and the UN system. An example is the FAO China IFAD Africa Solidarity Fund. We have the Secretary General's Peace and Security Fund on UN Peace and Development. We have Adoption Fund for Global Innovation Fund and DGFI Africa. And we also have the South-South Cooperation Trust Fund of the African Development Bank. So you can explore all these and find ways that you could access resources. Next, please. My next slide on this, the export-import banks, and the prominent ones are China, India, and also the Brazilian Development Bank. We have multilateral institutions that also finance cooperation. I'm putting them because we're in discussions with them. The New Development Bank, the Arab Bank for Economic Development in Africa, and the China South-South Cooperation Assistance Fund, which is quite a big fund on South-South cooperation. And then we have Southern Philanthropos and development banks like the Islamic Development Bank. So you can approach any of those. Last slide, please. Keep going. Keep going. Okay, no, the previous slide. That's the South-South Galaxy, which was mentioned earlier before. And if any of you is not acquainted with it, please, again, there's a link to the South-South Galaxy. That is the range of services that it provides on knowledge sharing and partnership brokering, including South-South experts if you are looking for them. But more importantly, the development solutions. In fact, I was very surprised when I speak to people. They're very complimentary about what they find in the South-South Galaxy. So please, if you haven't, do visit it, and you might be pleasantly surprised. I think that's the last slide. I just wanted to mention that PPD are part of the South-South Galaxy. And in 2021, they were designated, featured as the partner of the month in January 2021. So with that, thank you very much. I've taken a bit too long, and I'll be more strict on the panelists. Thank you so much.